8. Today we're going to be talking about providing feedback and how you can be just an excellent agent and not a mediocre broker when it comes to leaving feedback. I'm Aaron Lucas. I'm joined by my co-host Matt Crawford, and we're super pumped today to jump into this topic of feedback. Matt, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely, yeah. So feedback, why it's important. Feedback is super important for agents to be able to understand what's going on with the house that they have listed, and it's also important for the sellers to understand what's going on with their listings. So if you're watching today, go ahead and let us know how you feel about feedback. If you're a real estate agent, let us know whether you like getting feedback on your listings or not. Let us know what you think as far as what's your protocol if somebody doesn't leave feedback. And if you're a seller, let us know how much you hate not getting feedback after a showing, after you've taken all the time to clean your house and nobody takes the time to even give you feedback. I know it's frustrating. So I've sold a house myself before. So feedback and why it's important. So feedback is super important for agents to be able to understand what that buyers that just walked through their listing thought. So usually, depending upon which system you have, if you're a seller and listening to this, you're going to have a system usually called centralized showing services that is going to contact the agent that just showed the house, that just represented the buyer that showed your house, and they're going to ask that agent to give some feedback. So it's usually done through email. That agent leaves feedback, and then it goes to the seller or the seller's agent, depending upon how the seller's agent has it set up. But at the end of the day, it's super important for that seller's agent to share that feedback with the seller so the seller can then adjust things. So I know, Aaron, you represent buyers as well, and you represent sellers. So what are some things that you have seen, I guess, other agents leave in the feedback that kind of made you feel like, okay, I could probably use some more detail on this?
Sorry, Matt, you cut out there right at the end. What was the end of your question?
I was just curious, what kind of feedback have you gotten in the past where you're wondering, hey, couldn't the buyer's agent give us a little bit more details on this one thing? What are some things that you felt like you could have gotten better feedback about?
Yeah, the most frustrating feedback that's left. Obviously, no feedback is very frustrating, but the most frustrating when an agent leaves feedback is, the buyer didn't like the home. That's not enough information for me to go back to my seller and say, hey, they didn't like the home, but what does that mean? Did they not like the style? Was there an odor in the house? What is it, and how can we correct the situation? Our following showings and the people who are going to be coming in, that we can improve that in order that so we can get a house sold. So that's kind of been the thing that frustrates me most. What's your most frustrating thing that you find with not enough feedback?
Yeah, I think when I get feedback, if it just says something like didn't like the layout, I get that very consistently from a lot of real estate agents, and I feel like it's kind of like a cop out. Like, I can't remember what they thought about the house, so I'm just going to say they didn't like the layout. So if they don't like the layout, tell us why they didn't like the layout. Was it that the bathroom wasn't on the main floor? Was it that they didn't think the kitchen and the dining room should have been connected? What is it that we didn't like about the layout? So I feel like a mediocre broker is just going to kind of wisp through and leave very little feedback and not very detailed feedback. So don't be a mediocre broker. Leave really detailed feedback, and leave feedback that's going to be beneficial for us to be able to use and maybe correct situations. And like you said, I mean, I've gotten feedback before where there was supposedly a pet odor in the house or smell of smoke in the house, and so we were able to correct those situations and alert the seller to those situations, and we were able to correct them. Same thing with I've also gotten feedback before that was also frustrating to me as a buyer's agent and a selling agent. The buyer's agent left feedback saying that the paint color in the house they didn't like the paint color in the house. So when I get feedback like that as a seller's agent, I look at the buyer's agent and I'm like, really? So you didn't explain to your buyer that you could always change the color of the house? You know, even though it costs money, maybe it's a situation where you could ask us for some type of concession or ask us to paint it. There's all kinds of things you can do to work around that, but that kind of flows back to why it's important for us to get that feedback, because sometimes buyers say things that us as selling agents can then turn around and say, hey, well, we are willing to do this or this to make this deal come together. So if we get that kind of feedback, we can definitely work around it and help the seller sell their house faster. So that's why I feel like feedback is so important. On the flip side of that, I've definitely gotten feedback that was too detailed. So I've had agents that have really kind of disclosed things about their buyer that they probably should not have disclosed. So don't be a mediocre broker and disclose things that are not necessarily public information that are probably not good for us to know about your buyer. Aaron, have you ever experienced that? Have you gotten any kind of feedback that was kind of like, wow, I can't believe they just told me about their buyer all of these things?
Yeah, you know, a lot of times when I've seen, if you want to call it offensive feedback or something like that, you know, it usually has to do with some kind of styling or decor or something like that, something that's totally just disgusting. It has nothing to do with the value of the home. It has nothing to do with the layout. It has nothing to do with something that can't be changed. You know, preference and style and decorations are all going to be unique to, you know, whoever the homeowner is. So to leave those kind of feedback or that kind of feedback, you know, in CSS or whatever, it's just uncalled for. I found, you know, at least in my listing presentations with my sellers, I always kind of try to get an idea of, okay, what's your, you know, pain tolerance ratio? That's what you want to call it. You know, I always say, hey, you know, on a level from 1 to 10, 1 being brutally honest, or 1 being blatantly lying, 10 being brutally honest, you know, where do you want me to be with feedback? You know, if they tell you that your house smells disgusting, like dogs and cats and like whatever else, or smoke or whatever else it might be, you know, is it going to be offensive to you for me to tell you that? And a lot of sellers are usually say, hey, but still, as a mediocre broker, and just as an ethics and the way we treat our consumers and clients, you know, to keep a good reputation as an agent, you want to make sure that you are being honest, but at the same time you're doing it in a tactful way.
Agreed. And I was kind of, you know, talking earlier about some feedback that was also too, I guess, telling about their buyer. So I've had agents that have come through one of my listings and then told me and my seller things about their buyer that really are not public knowledge, such as like, hey, this person is going through a divorce, and they're, you know, I mean, just really detailed stuff about their buyer that really shouldn't be said. So don't be a mediocre broker and share things about your buyer that are not public knowledge. Not only is that unethical, I think it's a violation as well of some state guidelines. But at the same time, what Aaron's saying is don't come in there and just leave offensive feedback, you know, that's not going to benefit anybody. You know, I think obviously there's some things that are still going to offend people that could still benefit people. So obviously if it's something that's changeable, like Aaron said, and you feel like you can leave that feedback, then definitely do that. So let's talk about if you're a seller watching this right now and you're trying to decode some feedback that you've gotten about your house, 9 times out of 10, if somebody doesn't buy your house, it's generally because of the home. So if they say things like, hey, we felt like your home was too small, it generally means that they found a bigger home for a better price. You know, that's a common thing that I see a lot of times, is they feel like a home is too small. And of course the seller is going to say, well, didn't they know that? Didn't they see the size of it on the paper before they came? Well, sure, yes, they could see the size of it on paper, but sometimes houses just feel bigger, even though they may not be bigger. So there, you really have to see a house before you can really determine whether it's a house that's gonna fit your needs or not. So try not to get too discouraged by people that say, you know, something that you think they should have already known before they go and see your house. But at the same time, I feel like agents should do a really good job at explaining to their buyers everything about that house before they go see it, and so they're not wasting sellers' times. You know, a big one that I get from a feedback is like, well, we didn't like the driving distance. My buyer didn't like the house because it was too far away from where they worked. Now, come on, that's pretty easy to look up to see if it's going to be too far away from somewhere somebody works. Same thing with like, I've had this numerous times too. Somebody says, well, my buyer didn't like that this house was not in the school district that they need to be in. Okay, well then, you know, why did you look at the house? So as a buyer's agent, you should be able to understand what your client's needs are and anticipate those kinds of issues before you go and take them out to look at a house. You should be able to rule those types of things out as well. And obviously, as a buyer's agent, you're not always going to know what your buyer's thinking. So I'm not putting it all on the buyer's agent, but they definitely need to do a better job of understanding those things when it comes to feedback that we leave. Is there anything that I'm missing, Aaron, on that?
You know, I think I'm actually going to have to disagree a little bit with you on that last part, especially in reference to maybe school district or driving distance. I can think of a client, you know, here recently that I've helped that, you know, they really expressed, and I understood as a buyer's agent, that they wanted to be either in a certain school district or a certain, you know, certain town, but for the right house, they'd be willing to move out of those. So that's kind of a tricky one there that I think can, you know, there's exceptions to the rule, and especially in today's market where houses are between, especially if you're looking for a very, very specific type of house. But I think, you know, you pretty much covered the grounds as far as, you know, how to decode that actual feedback. And it's our responsibility each to our sellers to make sure that we're doing that properly. If it's one that's confusing or questionable, you know, a lot of times it's going to be straightforward. But there are those times in between where we do have to explain that to our sellers to educate them just a little bit better.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I agree with that. But yeah, I think we should ask the audience, if you're watching right now, you know, who's right? I know I'm right. It's okay, but yeah. No, you're right, Aaron. And that's the thing. A buyer's agent isn't going to always be able to rule out things for their buyer, because the number one thing is, you know, if you're a real estate agent watching this has been around forever. People have said buyers are liars. And it's not that they're a liar on purpose. It's that sometimes they don't even know what they want until they see it. So I agree with you, Aaron, on that. But yeah, if somebody tells me, hey, my kids have to go to this elementary school, and then they're trying to get me to show them a house outside of that elementary school, I'm definitely going to reiterate that to them and say, hey, you told me you want to be at this elementary school, and this house is definitely not there. Are you sure you want to see this? And it's surprising sometimes they don't realize that it's not in the school district or whatever. But yeah, I think the last thing I wanted to just kind of talk about is CSS instructions. This has been, I'm a part of a lot of chat groups, as is Aaron, and I see this come up all the time as a complaint that realtors have, and that is that there's certain instructions that every agent gets when they are showing a house. Before they show the house, the centralized showing services generally sends these instructions to the agent that's about to show the house. And 9 times out of 10, those agents seem to not listen to those instructions. So don't be a mediocre broker. Listen to those instructions. A lot of those instructions are very important. I've had clients that are sellers of mine get locked out of their house because specifically in the instructions it says do not lock the top deadbolt lock of a door, and it seemingly always happens. I've had agents that don't listen to these instructions and let their clients walk through the house with their dirty shoes on, and you know, totally just destroy a carpet that was really nice carpet, or have their kids run through the house and without the booties on their feet to keep the floors clean. And I've also had situations where people, you know, shut certain light switches off, and you know, it messed up some kind of, you know, timer system, or the number one thing that I feel, and I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, Aaron, but not paying attention to alarm codes. And so I've had several clients of mine that I'm representing as sellers just really frustrated with other agents. And again, this makes us all look bad when you guys do this. So they're really frustrated with other agents that go and show their house and don't realize there's an alarm code. And so then the alarm company gets called 40 times and my seller gets charged for having the police come out there so many times. And you know, I've seen it also where they just don't reset the alarm after they leave. So anything you want to add to that, Aaron? Any other crazy stories?
No, I think, yeah, for the alarm is probably the most common occurrence, I think, that I've seen. And it is frustrating, I know, especially with the fees like you talked about for a seller. In CSS for a reason, you know, as a mediocre broker, you're probably just scheduling a showing and just going to it. Maybe you're showing up late or early, and you know, there's no regard for provided or just common courtesy and respect for, you know, the seller. You know, if they're going to be, say the seller was gone for a few days, and if you left those lights on, that electric bill is going to be quite a bit higher than they were expecting because those lights are supposed to be off. So just follow the little details. Look what the, you know, the listing agent is asking, which is, you know, per the seller. But yeah, that alarm, that's a big one. And then shoes too, obviously, like you had mentioned.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's really what Aaron said it right. It comes down to just respecting other people's space. And again, this is their house. This is where they live. You know, you want to make sure that you're respecting their space as an agent of the buyer. You know, when you're showing a buyer, and you want to make sure that your buyer is respecting the space. Now, I will say, a funny story / frustrating story was that you can't control your buyers all the time. And so I would never say that you can always control your buyers. But we've had buyers that have, you know, just took off throughout the house and let their kids run wild and break things. And just realize that, you know, if you're a buyer's agent, you can be held liable for those things. So you just want to make sure that you're, you know, definitely paying attention to those things. So with that, I think we're going to close it out unless you got anything else you want to add, Aaron. I think we're.
Yeah, no, that's, you know, I'd just like to hear, you know, yes or no, you know, are you consistently leaving feedback? We know that for the agents that use CSS, you know, it prompts those emails to you pretty regularly, depending on what the settings of the agent are. So, you know, just drop in the comments, yes, if you do leave feedback consistently, or no, if you don't leave feedback consistently, you know, what that would be. So with that being said, that kind of wraps us up. Thanks for joining us. We're on here every other Wednesday at 1:15, and we look forward to seeing you guys here in 2 weeks.
All right.